It's a story of a young man at the age of 22 in 1915, but it's told by that same man many years later, in 1954, to be exact, remembering that time. He's a bit of a twit when he's 22 years old, although he's very smart. But he's looking back on it later and quite ruefully, saying, how could I have been like that, etc., etc. So I suppose you could say, well, it's a bit of a trick. You're trying to have it both ways. You can have him be a jerk, but not such a bad jerk.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steinecker and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Community Foundation in support of the Adirondack Community Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities. Nobody wants to hear us complaining about meetings.
No, meetings, they're a necessary evil, but they're not why anybody gets into this business.
No, me no like meeting. Okay.
Well, and I've always said, Ethan Shanty is the producer here on Northwards, and Ethan, I have always said that one of the reasons that I like doing this show and occasionally filling in on the air and doing a variety of things that keep me in touch with like what we actually do. People might not know this, but I'm the station manager here. But I would hate to be in radio without being on the radio.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not going to be on the radio in some capacity, I could manage a shoe store or a chapeau shop.
I could see you doing a pretty bang-up job at a Foot Locker. Take that however you want.
Well, I look good in stripes, don't I?
Yeah, I really tried my hardest to get out of radio, and then it just reeled me back in. I love being on the radio. I really didn't anticipate that it would be the thing for me. I certainly didn't think that when I was at WAIH 90.3 The Way at SUNY Potsdam that I would be the person who would pursue a career in it, and it just happened by chance. I mean, so many people find their career just by happenstance. But yeah, I trained begrudgingly. I was spending a lot of time at the radio station because my friends were all in it, and they were like, well, if you're here, you might as well get on the air and you might as well train. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. And my friend Jamie was like, well, too bad you are doing that because we need more people on the air. And I think that she knew that I just would naturally kind of take to it.
Do you know, are there other people from alums of WAIH that have gone on to work in radio?
None in my sort of like core group of friends or graduating class. I'm sure there are others. For a brief time, we were keeping what's it called, a Discog? No, not a Discog. It's a Discord server going with some of the Way alum. But it all came together when the Way announced that they were sadly shutting down. I think there were a couple of people who had done some work in radio, but I don't think. I can't remember any of their names off the top of my head.
Now the only references to The Way are by Fastball.
Like the band Fastball? Where are we going without ever knowing The Way?
Yeah, the song is called The Way.
Well,
the kids are all talking about that song.
The kids are talking about Fastball. I loved that music video for what it's worth.
It was a good song.
It was a good song.
Yeah.
But
my son is heavily. I don't know that he's heavily into that song, but he loves it. He's got that on his playlist, and it comes up when he's DJing in the car.
He's got a fastball tattoo.
He does not have a fastball tattoo.
He will. Be careful. It starts early.
It's all Pearl Jam tattoos or nothing, man.
Pearl Jam on his knuckles.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was on the air. It was my first job after college just because I knew someone who had an opening at a radio station. And then when that one shut down, there just happened to be another opening, a few towns away.
What did you think you were going to do?
I really had my sights set on getting into the publishing industry. I really wanted to be an editor. Unfortunately, I took no steps whatsoever towards pursuing that dream while I was actually in college. But I also don't think that my department really set me up for success because there was never once a conversation with my advisor about, hey, what do you think you want to do after college? Never had that conversation at all. I just sort of had this like broad general idea that, oh, it'd be fun to be an editor. And then I considered going back to school to get my master's, and a friend talked me out of it, thankfully, because I would have even more student debt. But he was like, what you want to do, like, honestly, you should just start at the bottom at a publishing company and then work your way up, and you'll have saved yourself tens of thousands of dollars, and you'll be making more progress than you would if you had spent 2 years
Hello,
going
I'm
to get
Ethan
your master's.
Chancy. I work in the mailroom.
It would have been fine for me. But after a certain point,
Coffee, Mrs. Kennedy?
I would have been fine with that too. I'm not precious. Whatever pays the bills, But I'm glad that I ended up in radio. I'm glad that when I left my last full-time gig that there was an opening here and I got my foot in the door, because I was sad to leave the radio. I thought that I was done with it because the pay was bad, and I could really not afford my bills. So I was like, well, I got to do something else. And at the same time, there are a lot of openings at I interviewed at the hospital several times to work in their marketing department. Didn't get that job and other stuff. There was a surprising number of gigs that matched my skill set when I left the radio station, but nothing worked out until I got here.
And it perfectly matched your skill set.
Yeah, because I had almost a decade of experience on the air at that point. It's so weird to say. Now I've got almost 20. That's crazy. But you've got way more than that.
No, this is 2026, so I had my first paid radio job in 1991, so this is 35 years.
And it's the only radio's the only industry you've worked in, right? Or were you a reporter for a newspaper?
No, I did some freelance work for newspapers. I did some freelance TV work while I was also employed in my first full-time radio job. And I was out of radio for about 9 months after I left NCPR the first time. Kind of, the first of a scheduled 3 or 4 midlife crises. And the idea was that, I was turning the big 3-0, and I wanted to see, is there something else I can do with my life where I fit and my skills are put to good use? And so I was the communications director for a nonprofit advocacy group, and it turned out that I hated it. And I got back into radio as quickly as I could.
Yeah. I was also out of radio work for about a year. I was just kind of doing some odd part-time jobs, and none of that was satisfying. And, I'd never been a person who staked my identity in my career. But at the same time, it was kind of a bummer to just feel like I'd put all this work into a career where I learned a lot and met a lot of people and built my skill set and learned how to do new things with it. And it just kind of went away. And but now I don't have to be up at 5 a.m. anymore, which is perfect for me.
Well, and you also came from a family tradition where, your dad had worked at the same place for years, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my dad was a millwright at Alcoa. My mom was a longtime manager at Hannaford. Most of my brothers kind of got into the career that they have now pretty early on. And so, yeah, there was a tradition of you find a job and you stay there forever until you die or you retire. And that was just never really for me. I wanted to play music and I wanted to write, and I still continue to do those things, but now I have a better work-life balance, which is great.
Interestingly, the protagonist in Giles Blunt's book, Bad Juliet, is at a pivotal point in his career trying to figure he's left the job that he thought he was going to be in and for a variety of reasons, and he finds himself in Saranac Lake working as kind of a guest artist or guest instructor at a cure cottage back in the 20s, or no, before the 20s, in the teens, I think it was. Yeah. In the days where people went to Saranac Lake to rid themselves of tuberculosis. The book, as I said, is called Bad Juliet. Giles Blunt is the author. He has been a writer for a long time, mostly of murder mystery novels, the John Cardinal series, and this was his foray into historical fiction. This is an interview we did about 5 or 6 months ago, and the reason we're re-airing it now is he's actually going to be a guest on an interview series that I co-host with the Adirondack Experience, the museum at Blue Mountain Lake. So it seemed like a good time to revisit the interview with Giles Blunt, who joins us from Toronto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
What was it that made you want to write about this kind of confluence of history, the time of tuberculosis, the cure cottages in Saranac Lake, the sinking of the Lusitania, even the Broadway of the mid-teens?
Right. My wife and I, for quite a few years, have traveled every summer to the Adirondacks, and we always make a point of stopping in Saranac Lake. And the first year we went to the Adirondacks, I came across a book, Philip Gallus's book, and it's a wonderful picture book and architectural history that focuses on the phenomenon of the cure cottages. And I had known that there had been a sanitarium in Saranac Lake, but I hadn't known anything else, basically. So I read that book avidly and insisted we go to Saranac Lake for a couple of days before we went home. And ever since then, I've just been in love with the place. I just ate up the history. I just loved it. And it was great because your history is still standing there. You know, the sanitarium is still there under various guises, but it's still there. The buildings are still beautiful on the outside. The lab is there, and now you have the Trudeau House Museum, which I would love to see. And I read about the ice palaces and so on. The anecdotes in Gallus's book that gave me material for characters, including a woman who survived the sinking of the Lusitania in World War I, only to then come down with tuberculosis and end up curing in Saranac Lake. And that, and also reading that the place was full of entertainers and people from around the world, the entertainers, because there were various special units for people in the entertainment industry, thanks to William Morris. And so I thought, what a confluence of characters. I mean, I just knew I was going to set a book there. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew I was going to do it.
It's interesting to consider how people might have read Bad Juliet had the COVID pandemic not happened as it did. Like the idea of people fleeing the cities and seeking cures might have seemed like a quaint bit of history. But, even if this book wasn't informed by the COVID pandemic, it's hard to read it without that filter in place.
Oh, absolutely. I knew I was going to write it back in 2017. I was well into it by 2019. So I was in the middle of writing it when COVID hit. And I was aware of of the resonances that would come from that. And it was very interesting to read about the history and how people reacted compared to what happened in the present day. One of the wonderful things about it, I think that era in that place just is like the epitome of America at its best. That was people of all walks of life coming together to do something good for the common good. You had wealthy people putting their money into this sanitarium that they couldn't even use because it was for people who couldn't afford treatment elsewhere. And you had state governments putting money into it as well to fund research. And this was a very progressive time, a time of urban reform. And at least 3 different health agencies oversaw not just the sanitarium, but the private cottages. Amazing, if you think about it. Individual homes turn themselves into a mini clinic, but there's nothing amateur about it. They were overseen by the doctors in the sanitarium, and as I say, by these 3 different health agencies. And every year they invented the Easter seals thing. I don't know if they invented, but certainly they were very active in doing walks for the cure, that kind of thing. There were posters everywhere about covering your mouth, don't spit, or you'll be fined $50, which was a big chunk of change in 1915.
If only there were signs that said, don't spit today.
Yes, right.
There's so many layers to this book, and I think part of its magic is uncovering them as the reader, which I guess is my way of saying we probably both want to avoid giving away too much.
Yeah.
But I think there are a couple of key elements that it would be great to have you touch on, and one of them is simply the point of view. This is really Sarah's story, but as related by the narrator Paul Gascoigne, who is telling it many years later. And there are many places where his recollection kind of dissolves into Sarah's own recounting of her story as she told it in 1915. That must have been incredibly tricky to get right.
It 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 was well, there was a big lag before I thought of how I was going to handle the time. You're right, that was a key component of the composition of this book. You have it's a story of a young man at the age of 22 in 1915, but it's told by that same man many years later, in 1954 to be exact, remembering that time. So he's a bit of a twit when he's 22 years old, although he's very smart, very well read. But he's looking back on it later and quite ruefully, saying, how could I have been like that, etc., etc. So I suppose you could say, well, it's a bit of a trick. You're trying to have it both ways. You can have him be a jerk, but not such a bad jerk. I don't think it's just that. It enabled me to write in a particular way, in a particular prose style that I ended up being very happy with.
And, who among us wasn't kind of a jerk when we were 22?
Well, I wasn't personally, but I know I've heard that other people were.
In a way, I mean, it almost felt like a cinematic technique. You could imagine Paul telling the story and having it literally dissolve into a flashback.
Yes, and then you have her narratives, which are also kind of a flashback, but I tried to do it so smoothly that you almost didn't notice that this kind of sleight of hand from one narrator to another, because her memories had to be so detailed that it would have been silly to have him tell them. She's talking to him, but under his instruction, he's her tutor for English literature. She's writing a memoir about certain events in her past, including the Lusitania sinking. And of course, that enables her to go into much more detail.
Yeah, so maybe let's take a little step back, and could you explain what Paul is doing in Saranac Lake in the first place?
Yeah, at first I thought, it was Sarah's story, but then I had to think of, well, who's going to tell it? And it ended up, I think it's more or equally Paul's story, and he's a young man, as I say, 22. He's recently been jilted, not quite at the altar, but in a very hurtful way, very painful way. And he's also he had an excellent job as a lecturer at Columbia University in English literature. It was a brand new pursuit at that time, but he lost the job in a fit of pique because he wasn't granted tenure just 1 year after he started. So a friend of his who knows one of the doctors in Saranac Lake manages to find him a job offer as tutor to the patients. The many historians of Saranac Lake know that one of the wonderful things the sanitarium did was organize the Arts and Crafts Guild, because the patients were there for years, many times, quite often. The minimum would be 3 months, but 3 years was not uncommon, and there were patients who stayed more than 10 years. That's a long time to lie in bed. And so they arranged for them to have tutors, instructions in various things, from telegraph operation to bookbinding to painting. But then they branched out into languages and into literature, and that's where Paul came in. He goes from cure cottage to cure cottage, teaching people about English literature, opening their eyes and hearts and ears to poetry and fiction. And that's not quite how he meets Sarah, but that's how their relationship develops.
And easy to forget, having just all lived through COVID, that this was a time before people could binge watch their way through boredom, if you will.
Yes, yeah. People, it's hard for us to imagine how much people loved books back then. Ordinary people, assuming they had enough school to read fluently, read big fat novels. A novel like An American Tragedy was a huge hit. I think it's about 800 pages, that book, also set in Saranac Lake. And people would read that kind of book in the blink of an eye. So yeah, he was providing a very valuable service to people who basically reading and writing were the things they could do most easily, the patients. So it's tricky in talking about this book to not give the impression that it's a medical book or a history book. It's neither. That the medicine is the milieu, Saranac Lake is the setting, but it's a love story of a young man who has to, if he's going to ever love anybody, he has to become a better man, I guess.
We should reassure people that this book is also not 800 pages.
No, no.
It is, however, full of literary allusions, not the least of which is the title of the book. And there were more than a few times in reading it where I kind of wanted an annotated edition just to dig a little deeper in the story. I feel like my knowledge of the classics might come up a little short here, but I think you've gone some way in just the last couple minutes to reassuring us that you also don't need a degree in English literature to appreciate what is at its heart a love story.
Yes. In fact, I will say, the book's been out for 2 or 3 weeks here in Canada, and the responses I'm getting from people they're quite different from how they've responded to earlier books. Usually people say, I get an email saying, I read it in one night, or I read it in 2 sittings, or whatever, love the plot, all of that. This one, people send me emails when they've read 10 or 20 or 50 pages, and they go, I just love this. I love this. They're hooked up. For some reason, the storytelling has really grabbed them in this book. And I love that. I love that because I wanted it to be, I've left crime fiction, but I wanted to keep that gotta read another page feeling. And it seems to have happened with this book, so I'm happy about that.
Was that a conscious decision to leave crime fiction?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, eventually. I should say eventually. No, not at all. At first, no. I thought, well, I'm going to write another crime novel. And I always had, all writers do this. They keep a list of ideas, novel ideas. And but I had used the best ones, what I thought were the best ones. And so I got a stack, about a dozen true crime books, classic ones and more recent. Read them all, and lots of them were full of great stuff for crime novels. But it's one thing to have the idea, but the idea has to engage you. And none of the ideas that I had engaged me to the extent where I want to spend anywhere from 6 months to 2 years writing a book on them. At the same time, I was getting ideas for books that were not crime. And once I made the Saranac Lake connection, I knew that I was going to write a book, and it was not going to be a crime novel. And but it wouldn't be right to say I sort of consciously abandoned it. It was more like it abandoned me. The way I like to put it is that the muse of murder no longer speaks to me.
We do get a pretty gripping account of the sinking of the Lusitania. For people who might have their history might have left them, this was an ocean liner going from New York to London in World War I, sunk by a German U-boat. Obviously, you can still walk around the living history of Saranac Lake today, but where did you turn to make your eyewitness account of the Lusitania sinking feel so real?
Well, there's lots of accounts of it. There's 2 big fat books about it. One of them quite recent by Eric Larson. They're both excellent and very compelling, but both of them and all of the accounts are based on a very slim account that was written by a guy who was on the Lusitania. He was a a rare book salesman. He was traveling to London to buy and sell books. And he just says exactly what happened to him, what he saw, and it's just terrifying. I mean, the Titanic had happened 3 years previously, and so everybody was already afraid of boats sinking. But the Titanic went down in a little over 2 hours, and that was time for rescue boats to eventually get there and save a lot of people. The Lusitania went down in 18 minutes. Boom, it was under the water in 18 minutes. And because of the nature of naval warfare at the time, they were only 11 miles from the Irish coast, but because of the nature of warfare at the time, the British Navy didn't respond. They didn't go to try and save people because you didn't do that because when they learned early on in the war, when you did that, the submarine was still waiting and sunk and killed more people. So that was a very rough sinking, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and as you said, the character of Sarah is based on a woman who really did survive the sinking, only to come down with tuberculosis.
Yes, she was a Canadian woman, actually, who lived in Toronto, and her husband. There were a lot of Canadians on the Lusitania. It was a British ship. Britain and Canada were at war. The U.S. wasn't yet. And her husband was going to England to accept a commission in the British Army. They were wealthy people. They'd been on the Lusitania before, and they'd been on the other great liners as well. Well, I can't say. You mentioned before you have to watch what you give away with this book. It's funny because it's even more so than my crime novels, because in the crime novels, I tell people who the killer is probably by page 100, and the suspense comes from, well, how are they going to get him? What's he going to do next? In this book, there are surprises and there are suspenseful things that I'd love to talk about, but only after you've read the book, because I don't want to spoil the surprise or the suspense.
Yeah. Is it at all, I don't know, awkward being a Canadian writer with an American set novel at this moment in time?
I wish it was not awkward at all, but it is a little bit, and that's why one of the first things I say when I'm interviewed here, because writers here are very elbows up, is because it does. I lived in the United States for over 20 years in New York City, and and my wife is American. We have as much affection for the United States as most Americans would have. So I tell them that this is a story of America at its best, and we all love that America, and we all hope the United States gets back to that again.
Do you view the real Saranac Lake any differently today, having spent so much time in a real but fictionalized version of the village in your head over these past few years?
That's a good question. I guess I do see the two things. Certainly over the past 5 years, I'm walking around in the past when I'm there. And I still do that to some extent, but not I'm sure that will fade. When you get extremely involved in a novel, it stays with you for quite a while after, especially when you're still talking to people about it and so on.
Yeah, I mean, one could forgive you for being in Saranac Lake and expecting to run into Paul or
Yeah.
Jasper or any of the characters who inhabit this novel.
Yeah. I kind of wish that Saranac Lake has been tremendous at preserving their history and the knowledge of that history. I wish, purely for, I guess, historical and sentimental reasons, that two of the best hotels there were still standing, the Berkeley and the Lakeside. They feature in the book, both of them. And it's like almost every other corner in Saranac Lake. Well, the Arlington was here, and the Grand Union was here, the Berkeley was here, the Lakeside was here. All of these hotels, not all of them, but most of them are gone, of course.
Well, I will say that there are they're not really Easter eggs, but folks who live in the North Country here will really be delighted to pick up on both the history and even just some of the geographical references that make their way through this book.
I hope so. I hope so, because I mean, I didn't grow up there. I've only known it for a few years, but I love thinking about that place and being there. So I hope that they will have that. And in my past work, I wrote 6 novels set in a fictional Northern Ontario town based on my real hometown of North Bay, Ontario. And I had totally underestimated how much people love to see their own play fiction, even if you don't follow it exactly, because you always have to change some things. But the people in North Bay have been wonderful to me, and they love the books, and they love to say, "Oh, that's where such and such something horrible happened there," fictionally. You know, it seems like the Adirondacks automatically gets you thinking in that way because of the great camps and things like that. You know, you see the sign for Camp Sagamore, and that brings up a whole era, you know, the Gilded Age and so on. The Adirondacks and Saranac Lake in particular, they definitely dwell in 4 dimensions. You don't just see it today. The history is all around you, and I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Giles Blunt, it's a terrific book. I really appreciated the chance to chat with you. I hope you'll find your way back to Saranac Lake and the North Country sometime soon, and we can have another chat.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Giles Blunt is the author of the novel Bad Juliet, which came out about 6 months ago. He will be the guest in the February installment of the In the Adirondack Library series, which is a virtual series done by the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. I co-host that series, and you can find out how to sign up and actually interact with Giles Blunt himself and listen to us talk more about the book at ncpr.org/northwards.
Mitch, when I started my writing career at the young age of 9, I really thought that what I was going to get into was writing horror stories because I loved horror movies, I loved horror fiction, but I found that I'm not very good at writing scary stories. I just don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not willing to probe the depths of my mind to pluck out the thing that scares me the most. So I tend to gravitate towards funny sort of literary fiction, not to elevate my crappy writing, but
as do I. So I think we've talked about this before, but I back in the day wrote a novel that is in the proverbial drawer, which these days is actually a thumb drive.
Yeah.
And the issue I had was the one semi-steamy scene that I wrote in it. I don't know that I pulled it off.
But did you have your sights set on being a writer at a young age?
Yeah, I wrote actually. So the novel that is on the thumb drive was actually the third novel I wrote. I wrote 2 mystery novels when I was young. Mm-hmm. One when I was a junior and senior in high school, and one back when I was probably a freshman in high school, written entirely by hand.
Oh wow! On yellow legal pads.
It was actually on a faux leather notebook.
Oh wow!
That in my 13-year-old cursive handwriting, and I'm sure it was terrible. But
well, you're 13.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I had dreams of being a writer in those days.
Yeah, but you expected that you would, as an adult, continue to write mystery fiction, or did you know?
I don't know that I got that far in the planning
Oh,
stages.
okay, yeah.
I expected that I would get a lucrative book contract when I was 17 or 18, and it would launch my career, and they would demand that I write mystery fiction.
That's what I thought would happen with me too, and then I just never sent anything for publication. Yeah, I hate sending my stuff out for publication. And I realized at a certain point, I've even asked friends. I was like, it'd be cool to be published. I don't want to do this. I don't. I honestly
Can I give this to you and
exactly,
you submit it?
Exactly. And they're all like, no, I hate submitting stuff too. It's a pain in the butt. I don't want to do it. And you can't pay me enough to do it. So whatever.
If the publishing company doesn't know enough to come approach me and say, will you write something for us? I don't want to work with them.
Why aren't they coming to me? I'm good.
Yeah.
Why don't they know that? They should know that.
They should also know who produces Northwards each and every week.
Nice
Ethan
segue.
Shanty.
Nice
Thank
segue.
you.
Wow,
I'm
wow,
a
wow.
professional segue artist.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. Bill Hanel is our digital guy. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To find more conversations and support this show, visit ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.
And Ethan, you know what? Writing certainly beats slinging liverwurst.
Have you done that too?
No.
Not yet.